Coogs House. All right, we got lots to get into today, but we have to start at the top with, are the Houston Cougars getting screwed?
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach, Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater game to step by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way you can latest on Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. We appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. And welcome back to the YouTube channel, because it is so good to see you again. We are approaching 1,500 subscribers, actually about at 1,400, just under that at the time of this recording. So make sure you subscribe and get us to 1,500 down below. Remember, at 1,500, we're giving away a hat, the Locked On Cougs hat, and then we'll be giving away a big prize, a jersey, if we get to 2,000 before the TCU game. So to make sure you're entered in those contests, hit subscribe so we get there, and then hit like and comment and tell us something about the episode, or if you're tired of talking about Australia or getting lost with that and the getting screwed on the money and the Big 12 and all that kind of stuff, and you just want to talk about something else, tell us what direction you cut your sandwich. All right, so today's episode, first we're going to talk, and I'm going kind of fast because it's kind of all over the place, but is Houston getting screwed on the money in the Big 12? It's something we got to talk about, and so let's talk about the latest on that. The second thing I want to talk about is the Locked On Top 25 came out. We'll talk more about that in a second, but trust me, it's not the top 25 I picked, and we'll leave it at that. And then third and potential final, we're going to talk some about the latest updates out of Australia with the men's basketball team. It was a little bit late coming out because the game was not streamed or televised. We'll jump into all that when we get there. Let's start at the top with looking at, did Houston get screwed? I think it was a common thing talked about on Twitter, Blue Sky, wherever you talk about the Houston Cougars, which you can follow me at Painter512. But lots of people were worried about this because the initial report that came out from the Big 12 was that all schools would officially be getting the full payment in the 24-25 school year. That's an update because with two schools leaving, and then this conference is going to be up to 16 teams by that year. Obviously, Texas Oklahoma leaving, and then you're adding the Pac-12 schools by then or whatever. Right, that's a lot of money being paid out by the media partners, and that's not necessarily what was agreed upon beforehand. And I want to stress that that number was not actually the same number as the 31.7 minimum that all the schools would be getting on their media rights deal starting the summer of 25. That's a number in the low 20s that the current 10, like last year's 10 Pac-12, 10 Big 12 schools would have been getting from their media rights deals before all of the bumps and things like that. We know that 22 bumped into the high 40s based on college football playoff appearances out of TCU and bowl games and March Madness units and those kinds of things. But that's the minimum we're talking about, is the contract that goes up through the first day of the 2025 academic calendar, July 1st, 2025. Okay, people assumed and heard that and said, oh, that includes the four schools that were not Power 5 coming in. Houston, and then also BYU, UCF, and Cincinnati. And that would be an improvement on the lower shares that Houston, BYU, Cincinnati, UCF all agreed to coming into the conference. So they agreed to, like, it's just under 18 going into first year and just over 19 the second year in 24-25. And so that's a big step up, right? Excited, people are excited. The TV deals must be pumped, etc. And then Bob Berta, Vice President of Communications in the Big 12, clarified with 365 Sports that the Pac-12 schools, as Power 5 schools, will garner the same $22 million minimum. The other schools are going to work with the same agreement they had. So while no money lost to Houston, no less money than they'd intended upon, it does feel like the late ads, the Pac-12 ads, as previous Power 5 members, are getting a little bit of a bump. And we talked about in a previous episode how this is potentially very unfair, and I still maintain it is. I need to start off, before we get too out about this, because this kind of pissed me off a little bit, by saying that all schools, all 16 schools, will get the minimum 31.7 in the 25-26 school year, the first academic year of the official new deal. So that is still there. That is still the way it's set to go. We're talking about the 23-24 school year, the one we're starting in less than a month when we play TCU, or we play UTSA. I'm getting ahead of myself. And then the year after, the 24-25 school year, both happening before the new deal officially kicks off, right? Now, again, this is the minimum. So a minimum of $18 million as a minimum is still more than, or just over double what Houston got in the American Athletic Conference last year after all of the bonuses paid off, right? And so I think it's obvious to say that like this is a good thing for Houston either way, and that's why they signed up for this, was that they were going to get gradually pulled into the conference at 18 and then 19 million, then up to the full 31.7, because that's so much more money than they were going to make in the American, right? And it's not hard to see that like that 18 with conference spreading out bowl game appearance bonuses and college football playoff and the March Madness units could get up close to 40, 45 very quickly, right? It's a great conference for those kinds of things. And March Madness units, I mean, you could see of the 14 teams in the conference this year, you could see 12, 10, like it could be a lot, right? And so that's a big bump. But I do feel like Houston's getting screwed because the reason the Big 12 is in a position to absorb Pac-12 schools and not the other way around is entirely because of Houston specifically, but the entire four, right? And so it does feel somewhat counterintuitive to me, and I do feel a little pissed off, and I think it's okay for you two as well to understand that this is Houston getting a little screwed by being the savior. Those four schools not joining the Big 12 would put the Big 12 at 8 teams this fall. Now, they might have added SMU or they might have added Memphis or something, but realistically, they needed Houston to sign on to the conference just to get to this deal. You know those media markets, and you've heard Brett Yormark comment on how Houston is so vital as a market for the conference. You know that was a big deal because they're losing Texas. They already lost A&M in the Big 12. LSU takes their pokes. Like, they need that market. Houston claims it, right? On the whole, now I feel like it's fair to ask, like, why are those – yes, those Pac-12 schools are coming in from Power 5 conferences, that Power 5 fan bases, and Power 5 bills to pay. However, we're only an option for them and not the opposite because of Houston. And so I think it's fair for Houston to ask for that. Houston does not appear to say, because Bob Berta did comment that the group of the – he didn't call them Group of 5. The Group of 5 ads all agreed to it. I think they agreed to it because it's still so much more than they're making the American. It is good for the long-term value of the conference. They're looking at future deals. And that is the original plan. So it's not like Houston had budgeted to spend more than the money they're going to be making. It just does feel like it's not that Houston's behind the 8 ball because we know they're building the facility soon and those kinds of things, but it does feel somewhat like favoritism that Houston should not be dealing with. And I think this is more important than people talking about like mythical pods and those kinds. I think this is a bigger indictment than potential mythical pods. Now, if you want to disagree with me, feel free to in the comments, and we may talk about the mythical pods and those kind of things in a later episode. But right now, it feels like this is the area Houston's getting screwed on. They're going to be making $5 or $6 million less, roughly, than other schools in their conference the next 2 years, than other new schools specifically to the conference, right? And so I think that's worth complaining about. Now, it's nice to know that it's set in stone. It's not a whole lot more hypothesizing because there's been so much hypothesizing in the internet. But money is king. One great way to find that cash is at FanDuel.com because FanDuel is the #1 sportsbook in America. Football season is about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long. Because right now, you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time they win a game in the regular season. That means if you want to bet on like Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs to win the Super Bowl, every time they have a regular season win, you get a bonus bet back. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl. You get bonus bets for every victory. Now, I know I just said Patrick Mahomes. I'm actually kind of leaning more into the Eagles on that bet because we know that they'll win a bunch of games. They have a relatively nice schedule. Jalen Hurts is Channel View's own. That feels nice to do. The Houston Texans are more of a nostalgic pick. They got Case Keenum's backup quarterback. We just talked last week with Locked On Cards about Clayton Tune just being the starter for the Arizona Cardinals. So all kinds of options as a Houstonian to pick from. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl. You'll get bonus bonus bets back for every victory. Say that 10 times fast. Bonus bets back for every victory. You can use your bonus bets on spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. All right, so I do belabor that point because I think Houston is getting screwed. However, one notable thing that's happened recently is the Locked On host across, just under 60 shows on Locked On, with some having more than one host. You guys are stuck with me, but more than one host, all voted on a top 25 poll. And it came out looking a little bit something like this. If we zoom in, we will see a top 25 poll, and we'll be doing this every week, that is at the top of the poll fairly chalkish relative to the AP and ESPN and other coaches polls and things like that. Nothing too terribly new, chaotic, or crazy. I will say that in this poll, I think it's interesting that the Big 12 is fairly well represented as far as Houston playing in the Big 12 this year. And Houston will play Texas, Houston will play Kansas State, Houston will play TCU, and Houston will play Texas Tech. That's 4 of the top 25 teams based on other Locked On hosts' opinion of the college football play landscape right now. And if they were to win a bunch of those games, if not all of those games, there's a chance they play a 5th, in either being one of those teams a second time, or Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game, because it is now a conference with a conference championship game. I say that to say, as I look at this, I am intrigued by a couple different things. One, it does feel like while 5 Big 12 teams made it, the Big 12 does kind of get a slight here. I don't know if that's because we're a little underrepresented or what have you, but TCU is by far and away the biggest drop in comparison to national averages when you look at other top 25 polls. Several polls will have TCU in the top 10 or 12. In our Locked On poll, TCU fell to 18th. Now, I belabored all of those points enough. I can see you shaking your head furiously right now. Parker, where are our Houston Cougars? Rest assured, I did have our Houston Cougars in the top 25. Trust me, I voted. Like I said, there were a lot of us in the voting process. I think I'm probably the only person that did that. I will say I had other Big 12 schools in my top 25 as well. I certainly did not have Iowa or the Aggies in my top 25 either. So I think that's where those guys squeezed in. But I definitely had Baylor in my top 25, and I thought that a healthy Jalen Daniels might squeeze Kansas in the back half of that as well. And again, I put Houston in. I had a Big 12 heavy top 25, trying to represent for us, I promise. I know Drake over at Locked On Big 12 is as well. I know a handful of other hosts are probably doing the same. But I just looked at this and was like, man, other people really are not looking at what the Big 12 brings to the table in the same kind of way. Like, putting Texas Tech behind Ole Miss feels silly to me, having just seen how that bowl game played out a year ago, right? Like, we understand where that's going. Interestingly enough, though, we'll be updating this each and every week, and you and I both see 4 different Houston Cougar opponents on this sheet. Now, as I look at this, I will say that I feel very strongly that the Texas Longhorns ought to be weary of the Houston Cougars. I think that that's a great game for Houston. It's in Houston. It is in prime time to catch them on October 21st. They're distracted by the Red River rivalry and all those kinds of things. I think that's a great time to catch a team like Texas. We also know Texas, with all their highly touted everything, with the exception of like the Vince Young year in the last 40 years, choke something away when things matter most. We've seen them do that throughout the season, the last 15 seasons, right? They have some game that they choke away, whether it's dropping interception like they did against Texas Tech. How many years ago was that now? Back in the Michael Crabtree catch year, right? They dropped the interception like 2 plays before that, and then turn around and let Michael Crabtree walk in the end zone. They didn't. They had 4. What was the year they beat Oklahoma? They lost Oklahoma, and they didn't score any points. They got shut out, like 12-0, right? Like that was an earlier Vince Young year, besides the year they won the college football, the NAF championship. I'm stumbling on my words because it's a Texas show and this is not a Texas show, but I do look at this and see a team at 11 that Houston can upset. I see a team at 16 that I think that in Kansas State that think people are undervaluing. If I had to pick a non-Houston winner of the Big 12, I might pick Kansas State. I really like what they have coming back. Texas Tech is also underrated to me right here. because as I look at Texas Tech, I see Texas Tech as a team that, admittedly had a quarterback battle last year, and we got one of the guys that came in second in that, but has a great quarterback and an offense that will probably put up a lot of points. I think very highly of them, and would point out that Houston should have beaten them last year, right? And so that's, I think, why maybe I'm impressed by that game and specifically and watch them go on, but I would have them a little bit higher. And like I said, Houston also would be playing Baylor. I would have Baylor I had Baylor in my top 25. I think I had them like 22, I want to say. It was all in a Microsoft Forms, and it's all turned in now. But I had Baylor in my top 25 as well. And then I also, for what it's worth, like I mentioned, had Kansas at the back half. He remember at 24 and 25. But we both remember Jalen Daniels when he was healthy, and I think he's a tremendous football player and quarterback. And I think they're going to win more games than people realize because of how great that first half of the season went for them last year. Now, Houston doesn't have Kansas, but Houston does have a rough schedule when you look at the top 25. I mean, they don't have any of the non-conference games yet because those non-conference games are obviously like you schedule them for pretty far in advance. And so Houston is still playing Sam Houston State, still playing UTSA, and still playing Rice. AP has UTSA in their top 25 at number 25, and so I think it's worth pointing out that, like, while that's not something the Locked On crew maybe necessarily thought was a tough game, that is one that I think Houston folks will. And so I think that Houston's schedule looks fairly tough when I look at the Locked On top 25, and I feel like as Houston continues to do well in it, it will be the kind of thing you see Houston climb the charts on. If Houston comes out and beats TCU in week 3, you better believe I will not be the only person in the entire Locked On crew putting them in the top 25. I imagine if, I'm not, I guess I don't have the sheets in front of me. If I were a betting man, I'd bet that I was the only person that had them based on where things finished in the polling. But I'd imagine if Houston beats TCU that week like they can, it's a home game, it's a crazy weekend, first weekend of Big 12 football in the city, I'd imagine that's one that goes a little bit more our way. Tell us down below as we look at this top 25 one last time, anything you think is out of order besides our Houston Cougars not being in it, and where, in looking at this top 25 list voted on by Locked On hosts, where would you put the Houston Cougars? Let us know in the comments section down below. Now, I do want to talk some about the basketball games that happened against the Australian national team. I want to make sure we get into that for a second. But first, we could talk some about bird dogs, because you may have noticed this cool hat I've got on. You may have noticed you're not looking at my pants because my pants are below the screen. But bird dogs are as comfortable and look great as you can. The greatest combination of that you can possibly imagine. They have a slim fit, but a tight fabric that look professional and feel comfortable. I enjoy the liner. I'm telling you, get a pair of shorts or pants, the liner, and thank me later. You can wear them to the beach. You can wear them to the gym. You can wear them to the pool. You can wear them as you sit down and podcast. You can wear them in the front of your classroom. You can wear them to work. You can wear them to gym afterward. You can wear them all over. They really are the most versatile thing in your closet, and they look good in every situation. So go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege or use the promo code lockedoncollege for a free white hat like the one I have on with your order. That's birddogs.com/lockedoncollege. birddogs.com/lockedoncollege, or plug that into the promo code for a free white hat. You don't want to take your bird dogs off, we promise you. All right. Now, in the course of this portion of the show, I am going to show some different pictures that were taken, still shots from the U of H basketball game against the Australian national team. Now, it's worth pointing out, the Australian national team is the same team that came in third in the Tokyo Olympics. They're the 2020 Olympics that happened in 2021, but you catch my drift, right? That team is still ranked third in FIBA. They field 10 NBA players: Josh Giddey, Matisse Thybulle, Patty Mills, Matthew Dellavedova, Jock Landale, Dyson Daniels, Joe Ingles, Don Maker, Xavier Cooks, Dante Exum, Josh Green, and Jack White. That's a full roster. They have 12 guys on the roster. That's a full roster if you want it to be of NBA players. And Houston squared up with them in Australia on Tuesday night, and then we obviously got the information back on Wednesday because of the time difference and then the not being streamed and things like that. Now, I have to say that the box score was incomplete in that it just had individual stats for the Houston players and not for all the Australian players. I think part of this, if I'm being honest, is that, as they're getting ready for FIBA and then the Olympics, they probably don't want a whole bunch of scattered reports out there with what all is happening. But as I look at this, I think a couple things stick out. One, LJ Cryer with 23 points on just 16 field goals is impressive. It's something we got to commend him for. He's going to continue to be a scorer for the Houston Cougars, and I imagine he's the leading scorer throughout. The other thing I want to point out is if you look at this box score, you will see that Javier Francis did play. He did not play in their first game against an Australian All-Star team. However, he did play in this game, which indicates that the injury was not as bad as people thought it might be. He didn't play as many minutes as he might have played if he were completely healthy, but he did play in this game. I also, in looking at the box score, saw that his minutes in meant minutes out for Jacob McFarland. So back when we talked to Chris Gardner on trying to guesstimate what would happen with Jacob is a great basketball player that needs to gain some weight to continue to play at a high level. I'd imagine that's more indication that he may do the redshirt thing we thought of, but we'll see. And so interesting to see that was kind of where the minute allocation went. But LJ Cryer, again, 23 points on 16 field goals. Damian Dunn was the only other Houston Cougar in double figures. The team shot just 23 of 72 from the field. That's not great. But again, they're playing an NBA caliber defense. NBA size, NBA length, NBA speed, caliber defense. You're seeing pictures flash across the screen of guys like Matthew Dellavedova covering Jamal Shead or Josh Giddey up in the grill of LJ Cryer. Like, these are pros covering the Houston Cougars, and they're doing fine, right? For what it's worth, they're only out-rebounded by 4. The rebound total was 41 for the Australians. They call themselves the Boomers. I don't get that one. But the Australian Boomers and the Houston Cougars had 37. That's crazy to me given the size discrepancy between the two teams. The Aussies, it looked like, first of all, they won by 34. It's 99-65, Australia. However, it's worth pointing out that they shot 31 of 55. I feel like what that means is the Australians got hot. They hit shots that, even with tough defense, if it's an NBA shooter, it's hard to pay too much attention, like if they're knocked down crazy good shots. They also literally do this for a living. So that's all things said. I think a great showing for the Houston Cougars by all accounts. There is no stream available for the third game, but we'll get to watch the fourth game and kind of compare and see the growth of the Houston Cougars over the course of their time in Australia. So stay tuned to Locked On Cougs for the latest updates. The thing I will say here, and I think I want you to pay attention as you keep going with this, is Malik Wilson, who entered the transfer portal and then pulled out of the transfer portal and was redshirted last year, didn't play, but was called the toughest defender at practice and all those kinds of things. His Texas Tech transfer, he logs 23 minutes, the third highest on the team against the Australian national team. I think he's worth keeping an eye on because, while I don't have film of this game, I do think it's worth pointing out that he continues to work hard and earn minutes, and he played very, very well in that exhibition against the All-Star team a couple days before. All right, so again, continue to follow the Houston Cougars and all things basketball here at Locked On Cougs. Locked On Cougs is a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network, and as a member of that network, I'm going to recommend going and listening to the new Locked On Big 12 and the new version of Locked On Big 12 podcast with Drake Toll hosting. Drake's doing a fun job being very pro Big 12. He has the Big 12's best conference in all of America. I think you should go hear him out. He makes some great points. Go listen to Drake. Go check them out for your second listen of the day. Thank you all so much. Locked On Cougs is proud of the Locked On Podcast Network, and that means your team every day. Go Cougs. Getting the hang of that with the fan behind me, yeah. Yeah.